The northern ridge offered the only vantage point where the horizon did not betray them. Cluck Norris perched atop the weathered fence post, his plumage ruffled by a wind that carried the metallic tang of unauthorized machinery. Below, Muddington Acres slept under a blanket of mist, but sleep was a luxury for the unaware. The bantam's eye, sharp as a grain picker's beak, locked onto 3 thermal signatures drifting low over the treeline. They moved with predatory precision, silent rotors slicing the air like invisible scythes. Mother Hen had escalated. Her aerial surveillance drones swept in synchronized arcs across the geothermal vent network, their infrared lenses drinking in the heat maps of the farm's infrastructure. To a human observer, they might have appeared as curious birds or perhaps agricultural drones lost in translation. To Cluck, they were the eyes of a syndicate preparing to carve his home apart. He tracked the flight paths with the patience of a predator waiting for the perfect strike. The drones weren't merely scanning, they were triangulating. As the thermal blooms shifted from the vents to the support struts of the old barn and the load-bearing walls of the coop, Cluck's internal monologue cold calculated the trajectory. Target acquisition was complete. Now came the map. Cluck dropped from the post, a red-feathered blur landing silently on the coop roof before slipping through the ventilation grate to the command nest. Winston stood before his workstation, a repurposed agricultural tablet mounted within reach of his snout. The pig's eyes were wide, reflecting the scrolling data streams he had harvested from the Agri-Shell supply manifests earlier that day. "They're not just looking," Winston grunted, his voice vibrating with the gravity of a man who knew too much and cared even less about the consequences. "I've cross-referenced the drone patterns against the satellite logs. The thermal scans are feeding structural analysis software. They're mapping weak points, load-bearing stress fractures in the barn, corrosion on the water tank supports, the exact load limits of the coop floor joists." Winston tapped a clawed hoof against the screen, highlighting a converging grid pattern over the northern approach. "This isn't reconnaissance. It's pre-fire calculation. They're building a targeting solution for a coordinated ground assault. Once that grid is complete, they won't just seize the deed. They'll collapse the structural integrity to justify the abandonment and trigger the insurance payout." Henrietta paced behind them, her comb twitching as she processed the tactical report. She stopped at the edge of the command desk, looking up at Cluck with a gaze that had seen through his disguises long ago. "Standard coop defenses are insufficient against this vector," she reported, her tone clipped and pragmatic. "The thermal tracking renders our camouflage useless. If they deploy sonic pacification to drive us out before the structural breach, we'll be panicked livestock in seconds. The straw walls won't stop a sonic emitter, and the locks won't stop a thermal drill. We cannot wait for them to finish their grid scan." Cluck stood motionless, his wings tucked tight against his body. The data coalesced into a single, undeniable conclusion. Passive defense was obsolete. The perimeter had held, but the perimeter was now a kill box. The syndicate was no longer probing, they were measuring for the execution. Every second spent monitoring the ridge bought Mother Hen's operatives more time to calibrate their destruction. He turned to face his partners, his voice low and steady, devoid of panic but heavy with command. "Passive security is a luxury of peacetime. We have entered the active phase." Cluck's gaze swept over Winston's maps and Henrietta's grim assessment. The shift was absolute. No more watching from the fence post. No more hoping the farmer would intervene with a wheelbarrow or a misplaced tractor key. "Mobilize all tactical assets," Cluck ordered, his beak clicking with the finality of a falling guillotine. "Gerald needs to be positioned at the primary ingress point. Winston, I need you to loop the drone feed into the jamming array we harvested from the inspector's gear. Henrietta, prepare the decay protocols for the southern sector. We are no longer holding the line. We are setting the trap." The bantam straightened his stance, the rooster by day vanishing entirely behind the assassin's resolve. "Active mobilization authorized. Counter-operation planning commences immediately. Let them finish their grid scan. By the time they realize what they're looking at, it will be too late." The electronic interference still hummed against the coop walls, a persistent static that severed their digital uplink and forced them back to analog tradecraft. Cluck paced the wooden slats, his claws clicking a sharp rhythm against the floorboards. In his mind, the situation was a tactical chessboard painted in shades of impending doom. Outside, the northern ridge remained shrouded in mist. The drone grid was incomplete, and livestock coordination was entirely theoretical. They had bought time, but time was the one commodity they could not afford to waste. Winston waddled forward from his sty, a makeshift decryption key fashioned from polished tractor gears resting against his snout. He nudged supply manifests toward Cluck with his trotter. The pig had spent hours cross-referencing agri-shell routing logs against intercepted drone frequencies. With a grunt carrying absolute certainty, Winston tapped a specific coordinate pattern onto the parchment. The secondary relay packet finally yielded its secrets. The command node was not mobile or hidden in a bunker. It was a disused agricultural silo perched on the northern ridge, repurposed as a forward operating base for the neural harvesting network. Cluck studied the sketch with the intensity of a field general reviewing invasion plans. The geography dictated the strategy. He fetched fresh paper and began drafting the counter-operation blueprint, his beak scratching rapid lines across the surface. The silo's architecture demanded a multi-vector approach. Precision would fail where chaos could succeed. He turned to Henrietta, tapping the paper at the sector marked for signal routing. Their partnership was formalized now, shared command authority binding them in silent accord. She understood immediately. Her role would be comms relay and sensor routing, establishing a physical hardline through the old irrigation pipes beneath the coop. She gave a sharp nod of acknowledgement. Next, Cluck's claw pointed to the pasture gates. Gerald was assigned chaotic diversion protocols. The goat's unpredictable trajectory would serve as the primary kinetic disruptor, drawing security away from structural weak points. Finally, Cluck sketched the perimeter road and marked the farmer's driveway with a heavy cross. He would be the unwitting heavy machinery operator, leveraging his relentless dedication to shed repairs to provide armored transport and logistical cover. Theory required validation. Cluck herded the assembled livestock toward the northern approach for rapid synchronization drills. The air grew crisp as they moved into the early light. Henrietta took position near the rusted irrigation valve, establishing her sensor array with methodical efficiency. Gerald waited behind the trigger lever of the modified poultry feeder, his tail twitching with barely contained kinetic energy. Cluck stood at the observation point, measuring sightlines and wind vectors. On a subtle signal from Henrietta, Cluck gave authorization. Gerald launched himself forward with the enthusiasm of a cavalry charge, slamming into the release mechanism. The secondary grain launcher engaged with a pneumatic hiss, propelling a concentrated arc of premium feed across the lower pasture. The trajectory was flawless. Pellets struck the target markers exactly 200 yards out, validating the diversion's effective range and confirming that kinetic delivery would not be compromised by atmospheric drag. Gerald immediately began chasing an earthworm, his tactical contribution already complete. Cluck retreated to the drafting table, verifying final timing constraints with meticulous precision. The drone network was still scanning, its sensors hunting for vent access points. If they missed the synchronization window, automated pacification protocols would lock onto the geothermal infrastructure. The cascade failure would be instantaneous, rendering the farm a sterile containment zone before livestock could even scratch the dirt. Every second counted against the clock. The blueprint required exact coordination. Henrietta's relay activation at T-4 minutes, Gerald's diversion at T-2, and machinery deployment at 0. He pinned the finalized document to the coop wall with a sturdy nail, ensuring it remained visible for command review and immediate reference. Henrietta inspected the routing paths, tracing the physical lines before giving definitive confirmation. Winston logged decryption parameters into his ledger, while Gerald polished his hooves near the tractor ignition. The air grew still, thick with anticipation. The counter-operation blueprint was finalized and synchronized across all active nodes. The livestock stood ready, muscles coiled, eyes fixed on the horizon, awaiting the deployment signal that would set Muddington Acres into motion. The counter-operation commenced under the cover of a bruised twilight, the northern ridge approach swallowed in shadow. Cluck stood at the perimeter gate, his comb twitching against the damp air. The tactical deployment was synchronized to the second. Mother Hen's geothermal weaponization plan could not be allowed to breach the surface. He had spent hours reinforcing the Coop's defensive perimeters, but now the real work began. The gates swung open on oiled hinges, and Cluck gave a sharp, silent command through his posture. Henrietta was already in position, her feathers puffed against the chill as she monitored the modified Coop wiring strung between the old oak and the barn rafters. She was their nervous system, routing animal-to-animal comms through copper and insulated wire that hummed with low-voltage urgency. Gerald did not require signals. The goat had been pacing near the northern ridge approach since dawn, his eyes locked on a silver survey tripod abandoned by Agri-Shell scouts during their earlier reconnaissance. To Gerald's tactical mind, it was a structural target demanding immediate neutralization. With a bleat that echoed off the valley walls, he charged. His hooves struck the hard-packed earth with percussive force, sending a localized dust cloud billowing into the night air. The particulate matter hung thick and heavy, temporarily blinding the thermal optics of Mother Hen's aerial surveillance drones. For 47 seconds, the ridge was invisible to their lenses. It was enough. Cluck noted the window and adjusted his internal chronometer. Now came the delicate phase. Henrietta's comms relay required a direct connection to the silo's antenna array, but the copper line ran dangerously close to the farmyard perimeter fence. Just as she began routing the encrypted pulse toward Gerald's infiltration vector, the heavy thud of boots against gravel announced an unexpected variable. The farmer emerged from the tool shed, a corded angle grinder in one hand and a replacement hinge in the other. He had come to fix a squealing door that was keeping his prize-winning sheep awake. To Cluck, the gleaming blade of the power tool hovering over the relay wire was an apocalyptic threat. If the farmer severed the line, Henrietta's command authority would collapse, and Gerald would be operating blind against a neural harvesting network. Cluck could not afford hesitation. He darted toward the equipment shed, his claws clicking rapidly on the stone floor. Inside, a rusted shopping trolley sat laden with bales of premium nesting straw left over from last season's renovations. With a precise shoulder charge and a calculated pivot of his hips, Cluck sent it rolling. The wheels found a slope in the farmyard perimeter, accelerating into a runaway cascade of metal and hay. The farmer's eyes widened as the trolley careened toward him, forcing him to abandon his hinge installation and leap backward onto the tractor steps. His power tool skittered across the gravel, missing the relay wire by inches. The diversion had succeeded, but at a cost of precision. Gerald, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure caused by the trolley's approach, veered sharply left. Instead of striking the silo's main door, he slammed into the ventilation shaft housing, his momentum carrying him directly through the rusted grating and onto the maintenance catwalk above Mother Hen's command node. The alignment was accidental, but tactically sound. Cluck watched from the shadows, his heart rate steady despite the absurdity of the moment. A goat scaling a silo was not in the blueprint, but it worked. Above them, the drone network detected the sudden thermal signatures of livestock movement and recalibrated instantly. The dust cloud had dissipated, replaced by an aggressive sonic pacification pulse directed toward the farmyard. The air vibrated with a low-frequency hum designed to induce panic in untrained animals. Henrietta's comms relay sparked violently as the sonic waves interfered with the copper wiring. The farmer, now safely perched on his tractor, began muttering about faulty grounding and dropped his angle grinder directly onto the exposed junction box. Sparks showered the ground. The relay was compromised. Cluck watched the smoke curl from Henrietta's end of the line. The diversion had held long enough to position Gerald, but the automated countermeasures were already locking onto the farmyard coordinates. He adjusted his posture, readying for Phase 2 of the counter-assault. Mother Hen's network would not fall to a trolley and a goat alone. But the opening was open, and the silence of the ridge had been broken. The game had changed. Perimeter lockdown engaged with a mechanical groan that vibrated through the dirt floor of the coop. Cluck's eyes narrowed as he watched the heavy steel gate slam shut over the yard entrance. Mother Hen had detected the tactical deviation instantly, her internal algorithms triggering the remote protocols before Gerald could even complete his third chaotic charge toward the northern ridge. The reinforced yard sealed tight, turning their vantage point into a cage. Inside, the air grew thick and dissonant. A high-pitched sonic pulse began to emanate from the hidden emitters along the fence line. Cluck felt his own balance waver as the frequencies clashed with his inner ear, but he maintained his professional composure, pacing a tight circle around the nesting area. Henrietta crouched low behind a stack of empty feed sacks, her feathers ruffled by the acoustic assault. She tapped a frantic rhythm against a discarded tin can, trying to relay instructions through the interference, but the temporary comms disruption was absolute. The electronic static drowned out every attempt at animal-to-animal communication. Outside the coop, the chaos had already peaked. Gerald's gnawing frenzy had been abruptly halted when the farmer's automated feed timer clicked into action. The sudden lockout of the grain dispensers sent the goat into a tailspin of confused bleating, effectively neutralizing his chaotic energy just as it might have exposed their position. Cluck watched from the shadows with a mixture of professional exasperation and pragmatic respect. The external assault was compromised. The pivot had to happen now. He hopped down from the roosting beam, landing silently on the concrete floor. The counter-operation could no longer rely on direct infiltration or heavy machinery diversion. They had to weaponize the farm itself. Cluck's mind raced through the available schematics, his internal monologue shifting into a rapid-fire tactical analysis. The farmer's renovation generator was currently humming in the adjacent shed, its output unregulated and dangerously unstable. If they could divert that raw current through the coop's old wiring network, they might generate enough of a power surge to fry Mother Hen's command node and overload the silo's relay receiver from the inside out. It was a desperate measure. Henrietta understood immediately, her earlier suspicion giving way to absolute operational trust. She scrambled over the feed sacks, her wings beating a steady rhythm against the dust. The backup battery for the coop's emergency lighting was located in the corner, its terminals exposed and corroded. But getting the charge to the perimeter gate control box required a bridge long enough to span the gap between the coop interior and the exterior wiring conduit. Cluck nodded toward the pen, where Gerald was still tangling himself in baling twine. The goats gnawed suspension cables from the old tractor, discarded weeks ago during a routine tilling exercise, lay coiled nearby. Henrietta darted forward, grabbing one end of a cable in her beak and pulling it toward the battery terminals. Cluck moved to support her, using his claws to pry open the terminal housing while she positioned the wire. The sonic pulse outside grew louder, threatening to disorient them entirely, but they worked with synchronized urgency. The process was a marvel of makeshift engineering. Henrietta clamped the first end of the conductive bridge onto the battery's negative post, her grip firm despite the vibrations rattling the coop walls. Cluck took the other end, guiding it toward the gate control box mounted on the exterior wall just beyond the wire mesh. The distance was too great for a single run, so they relied on Gerald's tangled mass of cables as a makeshift extension. With a final, precise strike of his beak, Henrietta secured the connection to the control box's input relay. Sparks fizzed through the air, smelling of ozone and burnt insulation. Now, all that remained was to trigger the farmer's generator and send the surge down the line. Cluck turned his head toward Henrietta, locking eyes with her in a silent exchange of command authority. The tactical pivot was successful. The farm would not be abandoned, nor its secrets harvested. The generator hummed louder as he moved toward the shed door, the conductive bridge established and waiting. The surge was primed for transmission to the silo relay, and Mother Hen's aerial surveillance network had no defense against a power spike originating from within her own perimeter. Cluck fluffed his feathers, adjusted his stance, and prepared to deliver the final electrical correction that would bring the entire operation to a halt. The air inside the coop tasted of ozone and impending doom. Cluck stood motionless on his perch, his comb twitching as he processed the tactical map etched into his mind. The perimeter gates remained locked, a steel jaw biting down on Muddington Acres. Mother Hen's sonic pacification tactics were currently vibrating the very straw beneath his claws, a high-frequency hum designed to shatter livestock coordination and reduce a formidable rooster to a trembling heap of feathers. But Cluck was no ordinary poultry. He was the bantam, and he had waited for this exact millisecond. He let out a sharp, deliberate cluck that cut through the drone's whine. To an untrained ear, it was merely a call for grain. To Henrietta, perched atop the modified relay receiver on the upper roost, it was the signal to execute the pivot. She understood the gravity of their shared command authority. With a swift hop, she pecked at the exposed wiring dangling from the wall-mounted junction box. Sparks fizzled against her beak as she closed the conductive bridge, completing the circuit that had been silently priming since the previous night's cascade failure. Cluck dropped from his perch, landing with a soft thud on the concrete floor. He waddled toward the gate control box mounted on the brick pillar just beyond the coop doorway. The device was a sleek, Agri-Shell-branded unit, utterly impervious to biometric scans and far too tall for standard poultry reach. Fortunately, Cluck did not rely on conventional entry methods. Wedged behind his tail feathers was a modified poultry feeder lever, scavenged from Gerald's chaotic engineering projects and hardened against industrial torque. He jammed the lever into the manual override slot, planting his feet firmly. The machinery waits for no bird, Cluck thought, his internal monologue dripping with the gravity of a seasoned operative pushing the detonator. But it obeys leverage. He threw his weight forward. The feeder lever groaned, then snapped into place. Somewhere in the distance, deep within the foundations of the farm, a dormant generator shuddered to life. The surge traveled through the livestock-tuned circuit, a path deliberately laid out by Winston's decryption work and Henrietta's routing skills. It raced toward the northern ridge, where Mother Hen's active command node sat disguised as a weather station atop the Silicon Ridge command node. The relay receiver on the hill could not withstand the redirected power cascade. Cluck watched from the yard as the silo's external lights flickered violently, then died with a loud pop. The neural harvesting network's control signal was instantly fried. The high-frequency hum that had been rattling his bones ceased abruptly, replaced by the sudden, deafening silence of a disabled sonic array. Above them, the unauthorized thermal signatures vanished. The drone network lost its synchronization mid-flight, their gyros failing as the command uplink shattered. One by one, the surveillance drones nosedived into the hedgerows, grounding themselves in harmless heaps of carbon fiber and shattered lenses. Mother Hen's retaliatory aerial watch was effectively blind. Cluck released the feeder lever and straightened his comb. He scanned the yard with precise, calculating eyes. The perimeter gates remained locked, but their locking mechanism was now dead metal. Without the command link, the automated system could no longer issue new directives. The immediate tactical compromise had been averted. He turned his head toward Henrietta, offering a slow, deliberate blink that conveyed absolute professional satisfaction. All mechanical prerequisites fulfilled, he mused, watching a stray leaf drift down from the now darkened ridge. Tactical assets have executed their roles with commendable efficiency. The bantam does not miss. He waddled back toward the coop interior, his claws clicking rhythmically against the concrete. The farm was secure. The immediate threat to Muddington Acres had been neutralized through the seamless integration of agricultural infrastructure and sheer avian determination. Cluck hopped onto his original perch, settling his wings tight against his body. He closed his eyes, listening to the quiet hum of ordinary livestock resuming their routines, completely unaware of how close they had come to neural subjugation. Mechanical execution was complete. The counter-operation had achieved its primary objective without a single shot fired or a single feather ruffled unnecessarily. Formal objective completion is pending app injection of central resolution. For now, the Bantam would rest. The Coop was silent, save for the distant, satisfied cluck of a rooster who knew exactly how to arrange his scenery. The silence following the electrical cascade was absolute. The hum of the relay receiver had died, leaving only the distant thrum of the farm's ventilation and the occasional caw of a confused crow. Cluck stood atop the roosting bar, chest heaving from the adrenaline of a successful pivot. Below, the coop floor bore the scars of tactical ingenuity, scorched wiring, splintered feed levers, and the faint ozone tang of a destroyed sonic emitter. Heavy boots vibrated the floorboards. The farmer pushed open the reinforced door, pausing to survey the scattered straw near the nesting boxes. "Good work keeping those foxes at bay, Cluck," he murmured, tapping his clipboard. "Though I swear your feathers are looking a bit frizzy today. Must be the humidity." He turned back to the hinge he had nearly severed earlier, completely unaware of the counter-operation's success. As the farmer's tread faded toward the tractor shed, Cluck hopped down to the main perch. The cascade held, he projected via the newly stabilized animal-to-animal channel. The signal was crisp, no longer garbled by Mother Hen's interference. "Henrietta, report." Henrietta ruffled her breast feathers, her dark eyes sharp behind her comms goggles. "Relay gain is nominal. The conductive bridge held just long enough to fry their receiver array. We have full command authority over the perimeter sensors, Cluck. The interspecies protocol is stable. Gerald has been extracted from the ridge with minor bruising and a profound misunderstanding of surveying equipment." Cluck offered a single, slow blink, a gesture of professional recognition. The simultaneous intervention validated our hypothesis. We are no longer operating as isolated assets. The farm is a unified system, and we hold the master's switch. He turned to the far corner, where Winston stood amidst a pile of salvaged electronic components. Winston's trotters clacked against the concrete as he poked a burnt relay module with rusted rebar. "Don't get too comfortable, Cluck," the pig grunted. "I've catalogued the wreckage. This wasn't a glitch. It was a directed surge tuned to their frequency. Mother Hen will be screaming into the void now. The relay components are fried, her neural harvesting network is offline, and we've blinded their eyes for now. However, the underlying infrastructure remains intact," Winston added. "The syndicate's remote access protocols are disabled locally, but their central servers are likely running on backup logic loops. They're blind, yes, but they're not deaf. This is a temporary reprieve. The skeleton of the operation is still standing. We've just knocked out its nervous system." Cluck walked to the coop window, his gaze sweeping the farmyard perimeter. The objective of securing Muddington Acres was complete, but the war had merely changed theater. "Winston is correct," Cluck murmured. "We have neutralized the immediate vector and dismantled Mother Hen's leverage. Yet this victory exposes the deeper architecture of the conspiracy. Agrishell's reach extends far beyond this ridge." He turned back to his partners, his comb rising with renewed intensity. "The structural layers of this syndicate require surgical removal. We cannot simply defend, we must dismantle from within. Our shared command authority is the key. With Henrietta routing intelligence and Winston decrypting supply manifests, we have the tools to trace the organization's operations. But the next phase will demand risk. The conspiracy will adapt, and our cover may be tested. We move from defense to deep infiltration when the window opens." A sudden chime echoed through the coop. Henrietta's head snapped toward a screen on the feed trough, flaring with crimson code. "Cluck," she hissed. "Something is wrong." Cluck hopped to her side. The decryption algorithm was struggling, the encryption shifting rapidly. "The jamming field is holding," Winston noted. "But this signal, it's bypassing our filters, high-level priority burst transmission." Henrietta forced a patch derived from Agrishell data. The text resolved on the screen, glowing with urgent malice. "Bypass confirmed. Source is encrypted but routed through syndicate black channels. The timestamp is live," she whispered. "They're tracking our residual thermal signatures from the cascade. They know we fought back." The message body scrolled into view. "Extraction team deployed. ETA 3 hours. Primary target, Muddington Acres, no survivors. Cluck's eyes narrowed, reflecting the crimson text. A physical extraction team meant boots on the ground, and warrants turned into warrants of war. The structural layers just became kinetic, Cluck said, his voice low and steady as stone. We have 3 hours, prepare the farm.